Hi, and welcome to an interview about why usability matters with Paul Volkarts, CEO of Nerve Centre. I'm Grace, I work in marketing at Nerve Centre, and this interview is in part prompted by a British medical journal study about the usability of electronic health records, which was conducted in 2019. Since the study, we've made a lot of developments, but Paul, please could you tell us a little bit more about that study and how it's prompted this discussion?
Sure, and thanks, Grace, for the intro. And yeah, we were really happy to be voted the most usable system in emergency departments by the most important people that could vote for that, which is the end users, the doctors and nurses. So that was really nice to beat all of those, all of the suppliers across that are used in ED departments across the UK. I wouldn't say it was a massive surprise to us because we put so much focus in usability that actually I wouldn't say it was a massive surprise, but that isn't to say we weren't absolutely delighted for us to be recognized in that way by those end users.
So Paul, could you just define usability for us?
There's some obvious definitions of usability, but there's also some less than obvious definitions that I think it's really important people look to as well. And of course, the study brought out in those kind of traditional questions of how much training do you need? How much technical support do you need? Is it intuitive? Is the system fast and responsive? And all of those things are critical. And people often talk about usability in terms of training needs, click counts. But there are a number of things that I think are additional to that, which also need to be considered for usability. Because to me, the usability of an electronic health record is not just about how long it takes you to enter information into the electronic health record. It's also how long did you know the information before you entered it into the record. So usability is really two things when it comes to acute environments where things are rapidly changing. It is how easy is the system to interact with in order to make changes and to do what you need to do in it. But also when I use the system, how up to date is the information in that system? I think it's really important that we get away from this retrospective view of an electronic health record being something that is a story about everything that's happened on the patient, which of course it does have to be, but to something that is a real-time representation of everything. So as well as the questions about how long does it take you to order a blood test, to review the results of a blood test, to prescribe antibiotics, to code off your patient when they leave the ED, as well as all of those questions, which are really key. I think the other part of it, which is a little harder to measure, is how long did you know that you had to prescribe antibiotics before you logged onto the system to prescribe antibiotics? How long did you know that you needed a CT scan for the patient before you logged onto the system and booked a CT scan? How long were the results for that patient waiting there for you to look at before you logged on and looked at those results? And so there's two halves of it. There's how easy is the system to use, but in order for a system to gain the real higher tiers of this kind of usability, it has to be much more real time in that usability as well. And I would suggest that if what you're doing is, again, this isn't really an ED focused scenario, but if you're doing a ward round and you go to a patient's bedside and you learn whilst at the patient's bedside that the patient needs their warfarin dose to be changed, they need some new blood tests, they can go home if they come back okay, if those results come back okay, they need a physio to be a physio referral. If you learn those things by the patient's bedside, but enter them into the EHR 2 hours later, then it doesn't matter how easy the system is when you enter them into the EHR, it still doesn't count as a usable system. because all of the other people that use that system will be looking at the patient and getting an inappropriate view of that patient. So to me, the real nirvana is that everything you know about a patient is in the EHR as soon as possible after you know about it. And it's one of the big reasons I think mobility plays such a strong role in usability, because mobile devices are really the only way to shorten the time between knowing about something and entering it into the EHR, and also to shorten the time between things like results becoming available and doing something about those results. So the EHR should be seen as something that reaches out to its users and integrate in, not just a system where usability is measured on training needs and so on.
Brilliant. Thank you for summing that up for us. So what are the patient safety benefits of usability?
So there are obvious consequences with getting usability right, and equally there are obvious consequences about getting usability wrong as well. And although you mentioned patient safety, which is key, the other part I'm going to bring into this as I answer it is efficiency, operational efficiency, because the two things go hand in hand together. We all know that the safest environments do tend to be operationally efficient as well. So for patient safety to be at its greatest, the EHRs can offer a lot of value for patient safety, not only because they're a repository for information, but because they offer clinical decision support. And so you really want the EHR to be guiding the user through the process of whatever it is they're doing, whether it's an investigation, clerking the patient, referring the patient, medications management, all of those things. The clinical decision support elements are really key, as are the pathway management. You know, I'm starting the patient on a pathway for a fractured neck of femur, and these are the things that need to happen. So getting usability right is going to help ensure that there is less clinical variation in the decisions that are made, but also the clinical decision support that the EHR is offering is going to be much more valuable when the data in the EHR is up to date and trustable. And so a lot of usability can be looked at about freeing up doctor time, freeing up nursing time, because of course the implication is a usable system takes less time to do the tasks that are necessary. And the ED report talks about burnout and how clinical burnout is a consequence of a system that's hard to use. And everyone can imagine that. Everyone can imagine if it takes 10 minutes to do something instead of 5 minutes to do it, and you're doing those things frequently, your frustration levels and your work levels are going to be are going to cause the potential for mistakes. But I think the patient safety angle is much more around the data that's in the EHR being correct, and a system that is usable, that has a high degree of usability, is much more likely to get strong engagement, and therefore the system is in a much better position to be able to enforce pathways, to be able to enforce clinical decision support, and to be able to guide the decisions that are made along an appropriate pathway, as well as giving visibility to the whole hospital about the status of the patient. But I also just want to touch on operational efficiency as well. And so a simple example within the emergency department, if you can code off a patient as part of departing the patients, then your ability to operate the hospital efficiently is much greater than if it takes too long to code off the patient on departure, and you end up building a stack of work that has to be caught up with at the end of the day, or caught up with by somebody else. So to a large degree, usable systems require less post work, and quite a lot of that post work, some of it can be administrative, but quite a lot of it needs to be done by clinicians as well. And so you get rid of a whole stack of additional activity that that needs to happen if the system is too unusable to allow actions to be taken when they become known.
Thank you, Paul. Some excellent points. So what improvements have we made since the study was conducted in 2009?
We're constantly making improvements to the product in terms of usability and in terms of functionality. But one of the key areas since that report, which was getting on for 2 years ago now, is just the amount of interoperability and additional functions that we've built in. For example, GP Connect, giving users the ability to look at the primary care record when the patient is in ED is a great way to improve the usability of the system, because you bring more information into the same product. But also on the slightly more innovative front, we've also just added a feature that allows you to use your mobile app to scan in PDF documents, multi-page PDF documents. So if the ambulance arrives and the ambulance has a paper handover, we can actually scan in the PDF documents from the ambulance using a mobile device actually on the ambulance, and they become part of the patient record really right at that early stage. So some of those things we do specifically for usability. You know, the value of us doing that from a usability point of view is removing a process where people brought paper into the hospital and put it into a traditional scanner in order to scan those documents into Nerve Center. Being able to do that from a mobile takes minutes off the ambulance turnaround time, many minutes off it. So there's quite a number of things that we've done. Probably most significantly, of course, is we now have ePMA and order comms as integral components within Nerve Center. And back when the study was written the study was performed in 2019, although we were the highest performing product, actually the products we performed higher had better, had a richer feature set in terms of ePMA and order comms. So now that we have those components integrated, then I expect our score would go up, hopefully to above what they're saying is that critical 65 point mark.
That's fantastic. Brilliant to hear. So how do we prioritize usability within Nerve Center as part of our ethos?
So prioritizing usability has got two separate things to it, really. There is a technical aspect and there is a user aspect to it. Everyone focuses on making sure that you understand what the user is trying to do and to make sure that you form the workflow that matches. The technology is what gives you the basis to be able to do that, though. And, you know, if your system is very hierarchical in terms of screens within screens, and then it's going to be quite difficult to match that usability. So I think that the underpinning capability of Nerve Center is that it's quite flat. And by flat, I mean we don't have lots of levels of screens to go into. We try and show the right information in a screen at any one point in time. The screens aren't really designed structurally where you only see X or you only see Y. We're able to merge different data so that all of the information you want to see in a screen is there. So when I'm ordering Ramipril, I can see the blood pressure in the screen at the same time. I don't have to drop out of my Ramipril screen in order to figure out what the blood pressure was or to look to see if they're allergic. So being able to drag all that data into screens allows an architecture that allows you to do that, really allows you to fetch all of this data and act. And getting the interfaces to be very fast so that you can go between screens with really, I want to say sub-second, but I mean significantly sub-second delays as you're navigating through the system. So that's one part. That's the technical part of it. And then the other part of it, of course, is the people part. You know, we hire good clinicians that are able to have these conversations, that are able to have conversations about what's important, but also to apply opinion onto those conversations. The world doesn't work as simply as, if I ask a doctor what is right in ED, they'll give me the answer, and if I just implement it, all will be good. It's way more complex than that in terms of trying to gather a whole series of opinions. So you have to start by having a philosophy about what you think is the right thing to do, and then you allow other people's opinions to guide your philosophy instead of just asking people and then trying to implement it.
That was an excellent summary. Thank you, Paul. So how can usability be improved within the healthcare market in general?
I think improving usability, usability is one of the core requirements set out by the NHS. So this study has really demonstrated how we improve usability. It's as simple as measuring it. So it has to be measured, and people have to be held to account for improving usability. I wouldn't be, it's great. It was great for us because we came top on the study, so we're applauding ourselves for having done that. But it doesn't really matter whether you came top or whether you became bottom, because usability is actually about improvement and not about anything else. And so every supplier on that list, whether it's us or any of the people below us, can all improve, and all should be held to improvements. So I think the key thing that can be done in the NHS to improve usability is to work out how to do those studies on a more regular basis, and on a broader basis. We would love to see a study on usability in EPMA, partly because we think we'll come top, right? Because we think we have a really good EPMA, and we would be delighted to come top on that. But the main thing is that we would like to for those things to happen frequently. I'm probably talking about every 2 years. It doesn't need to be every 3 months. Every 2 years, a duration that allows the supplier, because we are really talking probably 75% about the supplier's software and 25% about training and configuration. So if you're going to improve, you need the suppliers to improve their software first and foremost. I would hate to see usability being dealt with by increasing the amount of training that users get. That would be my worst nightmare situation that could come out of this kind of report, because good software you shouldn't need to have almost any training at all for. So running these studies about once every 2 years and holding suppliers to account for improvements every time they're run, regardless of whether the supplier was us at the top of the list or somebody else further down it, I would say would be the single most impactful thing that could be done.
Thank you for going through those key points. Thank you for your time. Is there anything else you'd like to share? Any closing thoughts or anything else?
Well, I just want to applaud the study really as a closing thought, because the study was the right kind of study. It had the right branding behind it. It went to the right people. It got a high level of completion from the doctors, from the frontline doctors and nurses. So it was the right people filling in the study, and it clearly has shown that those kind of studies are valuable. So I think the main closing point really is just to thank the authors of the study for doing that exercise, and I hope that they follow it up with either broader studies into other areas or repeat studies at regular intervals.
Thank you, Paul. That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, and thank you to the listeners for listening.
Thank you, Grace.